Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the TagoIO 2026 webinar series. Let's give everybody a minute to join here. We'll just hold tight here for a minute. While I'm doing that, I'm going to put in chat. I'm interested where everybody is from today. 1 second here. So I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, we're just going to give it a couple seconds, let everybody join here. I'll give it maybe 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started with the webinar. But as I said, I am David Hall, and I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. So please post where you're from. That would be great.
I'm Chris Glasso from just south of London with UKIoT. So interested in joining the webinar.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this webinar today. I think it's going to be a good one. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Again, as I said, I'm David Hall. Thank you for joining the TagoIO Partner Webinar Series with UKIoT. Great partner of ours. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. But today, we're going to talk about from IoT installation to insight, basically seamless IoT. What does that mean? What type of considerations do you need to take as we go through this journey together? I'd like to talk a little bit here about, let me change. As I said, so Chris introduced himself from UKIoT. He's the founder. Again, David Hall, Customer Success Manager. Anytime during this webinar, please post your questions. Excuse me. We'd like to interact with you, get any questions that you have answered. So feel free to ask any questions in chat. So our agenda today, it's going to be an open discussion. I like this format for the webinar. It's going to be interactive with the audience as well. So as I said, I can't stress enough, post your questions if you have any, and we'll be there and do our best to answer them as quickly as possible. So we're going to talk about the IoT ecosystem. What is that from a Tago standpoint and a UKIoT standpoint? Considerations for sensor and network, which are, obviously very important. Best practices for IoT deployment, future-proofing your IoT infrastructure, and then we'll have a small Q&A at the end, but honestly, I like to do that in real time. Just go ahead and post your questions. Really, we're going to talk about at least seven topics today that you really need to take into consideration, not just for sensor and network, but really your best practices and those sort of things. So we're going to dive into that with our experience. So what you're looking at here is really the ecosystem, right, with TagoIO. I think we're all familiar with swim lane one, right? Sensors. You have your sensors out there, they're connected to something, right? You're tracking something, right? That's communicating through your connectivity provider. TagoIO, and that could be anything from satellite, NB-IoT, MQTT, obviously LoRaWAN, whatever your connectivity selection is. Then in swim lane 3, what you're seeing is TagoIO itself. Where it says TagoIO up at the top, that's representing your Tago admin account, where you're going to develop your application, right? When I speak to customers and potential customers all day long, and one thing that they love about Tago is its flexibility. So as your business requirements change, which they always will, your business requirements will always change. You need to be able to adapt those very quickly with a flexible platform, and that's TagoIO. So the top is your admin where you're developing, right? And then Tago Run is where you're developing your end user experience at no extra cost, right? There's no extra cost to throw in your favicon. Maybe you want your logo, things like that. So there's lots of flexibility that you can do with Tago Run for your end user experience. And then, I've been here 6 years. If you look at number 4, integrations, I haven't seen anything we haven't been able to integrate with. I'm not kidding. It could be an ERP system, it could be Jira, enterprise systems, you name it, we've integrated with it. Again, TagoIO has been in business 11 years, right? We're in over 120 countries, thousands of customers. So it's really been great to see how TagoIO has developed over the years. Because when you think from IoT standards, an 11-year-old IoT company is quite rare, honestly, right? And when you think about it, As I said, what our customers love is the flexibility that they have to adapt quickly and to build their application. So that makes my job very exciting and interesting because I work with a lot of customers that are doing all kinds of different things. It's not just one size fits all. And when I'm at shows, I hear a lot, it's like, oh, well, you're just a visualization company. It's just dashboards, right? No, TagoIO is a full stack IoT platform, APIs, SDKs, all that. So everything in one place where you can build and adapt quickly, as I said, right? So, and then user interaction, we're going to talk about this a little bit more later in the webinar, but user interactions, your end user experience is extremely important, right? So you could have different permission hierarchies and so on and so forth. I won't dig into that too much right now because we're going to talk about that during the webinar today. With that, what I would like to do is pass this over to Chris here in 1 second. So before I give it to Chris, let's talk about our partnership real quick. What is interesting about our partnership is we adapt so well together because we are on the software side of the house. UKIoT is on, the hardware side of the house with some software, right? Chris will talk about that in some detail. But with that, I'd like to pass it over to you, Chris, to talk a little bit about your company and what you provide.
Thank you, David. That's a really interesting intro. Really, just a quick rundown on who we are. Basically, we are UKIoT, established in 2018, so we're 7 or so years old now. So we're early into IoT as a company, but we were formed to specifically focus in the LoRaWAN market. That's our real strength, and you'll see that later on in the presentations. As you can see, we have a lovely headquarters that we reside in, a super building. We moved there in about 2020. Uh, Next one, sorry. Yeah, basically what we do, okay? We are involved in LoRaWAN end devices. We develop and produce all sorts of different types of sensors. As I say, our specialization is in LoRaWAN. And we really we have a lot of projects where we need to understand the different types of phenomena we're monitoring and so on. We define architecture to meet business clients' objectives. We look at architectures, the LoRaWAN architecture. We select the right sensors and networks, as you'll see later on, and we hopefully, and we have done, deploy reliable and scalable IoT solutions. This is not an easy task. It's basically it's understanding the IoT products that you use, the sensors, how IoT works, the LoRaWAN works. That's really essential. And you'll see later on why we are pretty successful in doing this. But we operate from concept to live operation, and with our partnership with TagoIO, it really makes a one-to-one super system and really evaluates how our systems will run. Okay, thanks. Yeah, we specialize in low power, long range IoT. We're very much into our LoRaWAN network design. We have obviously battery powered designs, battery systems. We actually have to work in challenging RF environments, but we overcome that by our knowledge in terms of how we use LoRaWAN and our understanding of the LoRaWAN protocol. We produce scalable, future-proof architectures, and of course, we're very much also, apart from where you normally see LoRaWAN used in agriculture and external outside environments, we're also very much into the building management system side. So, in other words, we are able to help in terms of bringing new sensors into existing legacy systems within buildings and increasing the capabilities of those buildings. And of course, public and private networks, monitoring all sorts of requirements, for instance, in the public sector for monitoring water levels and so on for those sort of environments. Okay. And we have a very wide blue chip client base. really excellent. And we've been associated with some of the major companies in the UK and externally, and we have some very good projects that we can refer to. Okay, thank you, David.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So I think you could see from, Chris's quick introduction, again, we're going to dive deeper into this, but why UKIoT and Tago is really a perfect partnership match. We really adapt to each other's strengths, and you can't have one without the other, right? So we're very proud of
Absolutely,
this partnership. We've worked on several large projects, Chris. I'm sure, when we're still working on some, let's keep going.
absolutely.
It's been great. So if we really talk about, some considerations that you should, one of them really is, I guess it's the foundation. Again, I speak with a lot of customers. Chris speaks with a lot of customers, people new to IoT, people very seasoned with IoT, but it always comes down to five or six or maybe even seven essential things you need to consider, right? And one of those things is your sensor selection and network architecture. If we talk about that a little bit, environmental factors matter more than specs on paper. Whatever it is you're tracking, temperature, humidity, vibration, an industrial setting, those things you all need to consider when you are, thinking about your sensor selection, power source, maintenance, and model. Battery life expectations versus data frequency and payload size, for
Absolutely.
example. Network choice impacts cost, latency, and scalability. So as Chris and I work with customers, these topics come up all the time. And from my experience, if you really start defining these things we're going to talk about early on, you're going to be much more successful and be able to adapt quickly and scale. So, Chris, I would like to get your thoughts, on the sensor selection and network.
Sure, sure. Thank you, David.
Mhm.
Uh, well, if we look at the across the LoRaWAN sensor landscape, there are huge selections of devices that you can select. They range from all different sizes, all different capabilities, and it's really like a complete sort of mix of devices that you could go to. But the important thing is when you're actually developing your own systems and when you're developing system is to actually focus on specifics, on the products that you know, on those sensor nodes that actually you understand in detail how they work. For instance, I mean, there are all sorts of variables within each of the different sensors you might select. For instance, you've got antenna types, environmental ratings, what sort of probes, what are they measuring, payload structures, what information is being sent by that sensor up to the cloud. All these things matter, but the one that really is so important to begin with, which really makes the whole system work, is of course the antenna. You need to look at the antenna very closely and understand, are you selecting the right product with the right antenna to actually do the job, to actually get that information from its source into the cloud? That's very important to the gateway. For instance, I mean, you can look at a range of devices, for instance, like this sort of thing, where you have internal antennas. Now, they all look great, they all look the same, but they all have different antenna types. So,
Yeah.
for instance, we could be looking at PCB trace antennas, ceramic chip, wire cut, quarter wave, and monopole spring. Now, those all sound very reasonable, but they have a huge difference on the actual, if you like, the power of the transmit receive capability. For instance, on a PCB trace antenna, you probably are looking at something like a minus, excuse me, going to minus 12 dB loss on that antenna, which actually means that that particular device would be 16 times weaker than the standard external antenna. So what does that mean? That means basically that it has to speak longer on the radio, and speaking longer means in order to be heard, it has to actually use more power, so your battery capacity drops. And and this understanding of this ratio, or this sort of ratio of being able to understand the type of antenna it is, where you're going to reach, how far away the gateway is vital. So antenna selection, and understanding that sensor is really important. For instance, if you go all the way up to a monopole spring, you only have about -2 to -4 dB loss as opposed to -6 to -12. So, and that's this type of device, this Dragino's temperature sensor, has a monopole spring. Now that's only a minor loss, but even that is difficult to handle when you've got really extreme environmental situations. The optimum, of course, is having a quarter wave and external antenna. That effectively is zero loss, virtually 0 to -1 dB. And that makes a big difference in terms of when you're trying to reach your gateway. And remember, when I talk about -12 dB, you're talking about, remember that -3 dB is half the power. So, for instance, a trace antenna would be 16 times weaker, as I've said. So it's really important to find out about the sensor. We use a standard type sensor where we know we have an external, most where we can, we always use that, the external antenna, or we use, if we have to, where we have nice, smart internal buildings, rooms and so on, where it needs to look very cosmetic, then you need to go for the monopole spring. So that's the first thing. Remember, an external antenna gives you all the link budget that you paid for. So that's my first advice in terms of sensor selection.
Oh, that's great, Chris. And I think you could see, I think the audience can see uh, why I rely on UKIoT. Some of those things you mentioned, I did not know. So, so again, the device is not our specialty, although we're very knowledgeable in that area. But that's exactly why we rely on this partnership with UKIoT. And that's a great segue because if we talk about best practices for reliable data collection and transmission, what are some of those best practices, right? Because that's important stuff. You know, you need reliable data, right? You need to be able to collect it and you need to be able to transmit it. Define data frequency intentionally. More data equals better outcomes. Focus on actionable intervals. Monitor device health, not just the sensor values, right? Battery level, signal strength, last communication time, for instance. So all those are considerations when you're talking about data collection and transmission. Designed for intermit connectivity, right? Devices should buffer data and not and handle retries gracefully, right? So there's a lot of consider. I know there's a lot of stuff we're talking about here, and we're just getting started, but those are key things. And I rely on UKIoT. I'm going to let Chris actually chime in here. What do you consider the best practices for reliable data collection and transmission in that arena, if you will?
But basically, I think the key word or the key sentence is link budget. Basically, reliable data collection relies on, as I say, a good antenna. It
Mhm.
relies on actually on understanding what is the frequency of data that you need to send as well. I mean, how often do you need to send that data? That's another vital part. So, for instance, the link budget is all about the uplink rate of payload, the battery consumption, and what they call the spread factor. How long does the signal have to be sent? How long is it on in air before it's received in order to make sure it's really received well? That's very, very important. A lot of people complain when they buy a LoRaWAN sensor, let's say, and they have a gateway maybe through a couple of rooms, and I say, wow, this only goes about 500 meters. Now, what's going on here? Why am I not receiving it? The point is that you've got to select the right type of device and you've got to understand the link budget. That's very, very important. For instance, if we look at, for instance, the rate of payload, a lot of customers really want to quite often say, well, we want to see that data every few minutes, every 3 or 4 minutes, or whatever. But you've got to look at this very carefully. It's got to be very well selected. How often do you really need it? Because every time you send an uplink, you're actually using battery. So in other words, the combination of, let's say, the link budget and the battery capacity, how long do you want it to be in the building? How long before you want to maintain it?
Mhm.
All of that is a whole subject together that you have to think about. It's a multi-dimensional question that you have to answer. And you've got to go through each factor very carefully to ensure that you actually have a system that works as long as you want it to work and that you're actually getting the data that you want up there at the right time.
I totally agree with you. Taking in these considerations early on are going to save you trouble down the road or replacing hardware. It's basically going to save you money, right? If you really understand, you need to take the time to investigate these points, specifically the points that Chris are making and that I am making, to really have a scalable IoT solution, right? So what Chris is talking about from his end is all those considerations. It may seem like a lot, but it's really not. And if you guys have questions, obviously you can reach out to UKIoT, you can reach out to TagoIO, and we could have a one-on-one session with you to really get you up to
Absolutely.
speed if some of this is not making sense to you, right? Because I realize it's a lot, right? But once you actually sit down with the experts at TagoIO and UKIoT, it's really very simple. Once you understand and we understand the direction that you want to go and what you're trying to accomplish, right? Then we can really hone in and really assist you. So I'll mention this again during the webinar, at the end of the webinar, but please reach out to us for any of these topics or anything in general that you want to learn from UKIoT or TagoIO. It's very important. And
Can
we're
I add
talking
one
about,
more point
yeah,
to that,
please.
David? Yeah, basically, yeah, absolutely right, David. I totally agree with what you're saying there. And I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that a really good system is a combination of collecting the data reliably, correctly, and having the analysis at the top end. These two things make a total system, a real workable system. You can't just collect data and then assume you're going to see what's going to be happening. You've got to make use of it. In a moment, I've got a, well, after we go to our next section, I've got a little application, or a little case study, if you like, small one that shows the importance of that link. But basically, one of the things in terms of reliable data collection, I did want to add in there
Mhm.
was that remember a sensor node actually has senses in different ways, right? We've got what I call direct sensing, which is analog voltage, resistance, capacitance. So you could actually do things like monitor a tank float, door contacts, that sort of thing with direct sensing. Then have indirect sensing, where you add an intelligent sensor at one end and connect into the sensor node. That's something they're using serial information like I2C, one wire, UART, like for instance the Dallas DS18B20, which is used a lot, temperature sensor, which is used enormously. But the point is, you've got to have flexible sensing. What we do is we use a device like this. This is the Dragino SN50,
Oh, yeah.
and we can put different sensors on there. So, in other words, you can actually be flexible in the way that you collect data. And it's about reconfiguring, being able to collect data in a known, solid way. So, you know your RF link is there, but you've got to know how to collect that data. But the important thing I want to add is that whatever you take up to the top there, whatever you need, you've got to have intelligence at the top end. And really, Tago smart decoding really unlocks the capability without changing the hardware. So, in other words, with a good top end dashboard like Tago with its analysis capabilities, you can actually increase the capabilities of the sensors you've got. And I'll show you that a bit later when we move into our discussion.
Yeah, and you're exactly, thank you, Chris. That's exactly the point, right? So when you're thinking from the TagoIO side, right, it's not just visualization, as I said at the top of this webinar. It's data analytics, it's analysis. There's a lot to it. Tago is huge. There's a lot there that you can take advantage of when you're working with UKIoT and getting your solution ready there. So it's a great supplement partnership, quite honestly. And if we talk about transferring raw data into meaningful business insights. What does that mean? I mean, nobody wants to just look at a dashboard. Yes, you get some information there, but if you think about it, raw sensor data is rarely useful on its own. I mean, what are you going to do with raw sensor data? The value comes from context, such as asset location, analytics, reports, alerts. That's where the value comes in. Part of the value comes in. There's much more to it. But automation turns insights into outcomes. Notifications, as I mentioned, workflows, integration, and automated responses. An example of that, I just got wrapped up a project with a very nice company, also in the UK, and they are in the industrial space. And automated responses. What do I mean by automated responses? A vibration gets too high on a system. That sensor is smart enough to turn that machine off. So preventative maintenance, right? So it's not just humans reacting to a notification or an alert or something like that. You can have some automation responses built in there if you choose the right sensor, right? So, Chris, I know you've worked in this, transferring raw IoT data into meaningful business insights. I'd like to hear your opinion on that as well. I think you're a little more versed in that area, but for me, it comes down to, is that raw data, are you using it correctly and in the best way that you can?
Absolutely, David. Yeah, I mean, I want to give a little example about a very simple example, which is a dishwasher. Now, we have a project which goes across multiple restaurants across the UK, and they monitor the dishwashers apart from the obviously temperature sensors in fridges and other types of appliances. But it's an interesting point. If you take the dishwasher example, for instance. What can we measure there? We can measure the water flow going into this dishwasher. We can monitor power consumption. That's pretty straightforward. And when we send that data to a dashboard, we can imply a lot of interesting things, like there may be when is the dishwasher being used, how often, and how much water is being used, and so on. Really useful stuff. But what if we go a bit further than that? What if we go and actually monitor the rinse aid and the detergent going into there, which we do. We monitor when rinse aid and detergent is being injected into that dishwasher as well. Well, this opens up a huge range of opportunity in terms of, of, of energy reduction and monitoring and so on. So, for instance, what we do is we use capacitors to monitor the fluids within tubes. So we know exactly when the rinse aid is being injected in, when detergent's being injected in. So it's a really, really powerful capability. But if you think about it, that's not much data. That's like two digital inputs,
Mhm.
and that's a count on the water flow, and it's a current on the power consumption. That's all we're doing. And yet, what you can do from that, when you bring it up into a dashboard, just that basic information, those five elements. In that basic information, you could do, for instance, you can start to do operational health and early fault detection by block filters, scale jets, for instance, failing pumps, sticking fill valves, inlet restrictions. You could do all of that. You could also check for leaks, stuck drains, siphoning. You could detect all of that. And this is through using the dashboards in the right way. You can look at heater degradation, lime scale on elements. You can imply that from the way the characteristics are. The
Yes.
wash quality, how good is the wash that's going on within in all these restaurants? You can compare this information across a wide range of sites and actually do comparisons. Who is using the dishwashers more than others? What are the how many times is the dishwasher being used compared to the amount of people using the restaurant? I mean, there is an enormous scope. For instance, you can get underdosing detergent information, overdosing too much chemical. So you've got regulatory aspects as well that you can report on and understand, and you've got rinse aid issues and so on. And once you've got the normalized KPIs, you can benchmark all of your dishwashers across the piece, and you can
Mhm.
start to understand which ones are failing, which ones are working correctly, and you can send people out in advance, maintain, send send the chemicals out when it's needed. It saves you a huge amount of money, and the economic advantages are massive. So just from these 4 or 5 bits of data that we're sending up via our Dragino product to Tago, you can get a huge potential payback on that. And in fact, what we do in the project we have, the payback is very, very quick. And that's just one appliance. Think what you can do with multiple appliances. The opportunities are enormous. Anyway,
Yeah, exactly. You reminded me. I worked with obviously many customers, right? And when I first came to Tago, right, I was working with the agriculture company and they have these huge propane tanks on their property, right? And grain bins and things like that. It's just a huge agriculture farm. They do farming and livestock and things like that. And we're monitoring gates through Tago, how long a paddock has been open, things like that. But one thing that one of my first exposures was I was talking to this customer and he was already using TagoIO, and when his propane tank or his feed bins got down to a certain percentage, TagoIO would sense that through the sensor capabilities and then send a message to the provider, to the propane provider. The owner of the farm didn't have to do anything. He was just monitoring this. Sent that notification to the distributor. Distributor would come out, acknowledge the notification. The owner of the farm would look at it and say, "Oh, my propane tank is now at 98%. I'm good. I didn't have to do anything." His automation process did it all. And I hit on preventative
Yeah.
maintenance. Smart building. I work with a lot of customers in smart building arena as well. When there's a leak, just through Toggle, you can hit close valve and it's going to close that valve. Again, preventative maintenance. And we actually have a question here. It looks like it's from Kingfin. We're looking to automate a truck weighbridge system. Currently, it's manual. The truck is weighed. A clerk records the data in a spreadsheet and then emails it. Do you have a solution for this or someone who does? Yes, that is the point of Togo. Chris, I want to let you speak on this real quick, but that type of problem solving, it's not necessarily a problem, but you're taking that manual intervention that a user has to do and you're automating it. So to answer your question, Kingfin, absolutely. Before I pass to Chris, he'll spend a couple seconds on this before we move on to our next subject. But I highly recommend, go to the TagoIO website, ask for a demo. I could have Chris on if needed or somebody from his team on, and we could dig into your requirements. But what you're stating there is 100% doable.
Yeah, basically, yes, that's right, David. And yeah, we can when it's interfacing to your weighbridge, I'm sure there's going to be one way with the flexibility of the device that we have. We have requests to interface to a whole range of unusual devices as well, phenomena. And with basically, we can normally do most of those. So if your weighbridge has any opportunity to, for instance, taking voltages, or we can add our own sensors into that, we'd certainly be able to collect that data for you and then bring it up to into Tago dashboard so you can have some form of automation reporting from there. But yeah, it's certainly doable. Very much so. It's an interesting application. Again, I like these interesting applications pop up. It
Yes.
makes you make it makes my day when you have some interesting things to do.
I agree. I'm working with customers, longtime customers that, they're monitoring current flows, temperature in the San Diego Bay out there. I work with customers that are, monitoring livestock, as I said, smart buildings, you name it. IoT is amazing. There's so much you can adapt to it, and that's the beauty about TagoIO and UKIoT is we adapt to these things very quickly, right? Again, think flexibility,
Absolutely.
customization, right? That's what the name of the game is. You're not stuck with just a turnkey application that it's really hard, when you have business requirement changes, it's hard to adapt those changes in real time. With Tago, you can do that. And I won't spend a lot on this next topic, but using dashboard reports that drive decision making, that's pretty important, right? So dashboards are role based. One size does not fit all, right? You have operators, managers, executives, all different views. They're all interested in different information. A CEO of a company, they might not be interested or ever log in and look at a dashboard, right? They're interested in what alert, something in a CSV report, a nice PDF report of, what insights did I gather this week, right? What alerts happened? What happened? What do I need to take action? Where am I having preventative maintenance? Where is my company making headway? Right? That's what those people are interested in, right? The stakeholders. And then you have the operators and managers, they're interested in something else. So if you think about it, use real-time dashboards for operators, reports, and accountability, right? Daily, weekly, monthly summaries, whatever you choose to do. Again, think customization and flexibility. You're going to hear me say that a couple more times because it's just very true. Dashboards should answer questions, not just display data. And that's why when people come to me, and I said this at the top of the webinar, oh, you're just a visualization company. Oh, no, I'd like to sit down and talk to you for a little bit and change your mind on that because it's not just about dashboards. It's much, much more than that.
Absolutely, David. Yeah, I mean, I look at it in terms of strategic versus tactical. So it's a tactical approach is one end of it where you've got to actually respond pretty quickly to what's happening. For instance, you've got to be able to have the ability to acknowledge alerts and understand what action is needed, carry out define corrective actions. What are you going to do? Do refills, clean, isolate, restart. There's a whole range of things like act within agreed times, response times. You've got to lay that out. A system that you can have the best system in the world that's collecting all the data you need and displaying all that you want. If your staff are not trained to react to that correctly, then it's a wasted system. It's not
Mhm.
doing anything for you. You need to have, it's a two-handed thing. You have the system and you must have the response structure to deal with it. And of course, then after that, you've also got strategic, where, for instance, at the higher level, you're looking at where you gain, where your KPIs give you the opportunity to save money, to actually improve things, to actually reduce your carbon footprint by doing various things, by reducing your energy consumption, a whole range of things. And believe you me, IoT using this sort of structure with LoRaWAN sensing information and TagoIO with a good dashboard, you could save huge amounts of money and costs within a system. We've seen that time and time again. But in
Absolutely.
strategic, absolutely, yep, yep.
Yep. I see that a lot with customers, when they're starting out, they have an objective, right? And the CEO's objective or the CTO's objective, whoever, they want to save the money. You tell me how you're going to do that, right? And through IoT, you can certainly do that. And data doesn't lie. I've always said that throughout my career. Data does not lie, right? So if you have that data and if you're using that data correctly, you're going to get the insights that you need on many, many different levels throughout your organization or what you're trying to accomplish there. One thing just to back up, Kingfin, I have your information for your email address. I'll shoot you an email later today and we can have all of us connect sometime later in the week. But I got your information just to let you know. So if we're talking about integration strategies, for connecting IoT data with existing business systems, what is that, right? Well, IoT data rarely lives in isolation, right? It's real ERP, CRMs, BI tools, data warehouses, data lakes, whatever it is, you can integrate all that with TagoIO. I said a little while ago, I haven't seen anything we haven't been able to integrate with. I'm sure there are. I'm not saying that, we can integrate with anything and everything, but in my 6 years here, I honestly have not seen anything we couldn't integrate with. And people that are building, that understand when they're building an IoT application in a project, it's not just about, the visualization, as I've said a few times during this webinar. They really understand what to do with that data, right? Whatever their KPIs are or what they're trying to do, they understand what to do. And that makes a very successful IoT application and for longevity, right? It's going to last. So, use APIs and webhooks to avoid brittle point-to-point, connections. Normalize data models early. That's important. It makes integrations easier and it's going to be cheaper for you in the long run, quite honestly. Event-driven integrations scale better than polling, right? If you think about that, trigger actions when something happens, as we spoke about a little bit earlier. And my last point about here, security is important to everybody, and UKIoT, TagoIO takes security, at the highest point, right? It's very, very important, not just for us, but for our customers, right? So when you think about that, security and access control are part of the integration design. They're not an afterthought. You need to be thinking of that as well. I know we're talking about a lot of considerations here today, but they all tie together to one thing, and that's making you successful in your IoT application, right? So, Chris, integration strategies, right, for existing business systems and things like that. I'm sure you have some comments on that. You've been doing this a little longer than I have.
That's great. Thank you, David. Now, you make some really good points there, David, I must say. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of buildings out there that have legacy systems in them, SCADA systems and so on, which need to upgrade to modern standards for net zero, for reduction with the cost of energy these days. Now in Europe, it's huge.
Yes.
They need to look at ways of reducing their energy consumptions. And there are ways of doing this. And for instance, we have several projects where we interface our devices, our LoRaWAN devices, into through a gateway and into a LoRaWAN to BACnet gateway, so we can actually integrate directly into the existing building management systems.
Mhm.
So, and remember, it's wireless, so you can just place these devices around the buildings. You can then, which they last, the battery lasts for good 5 years or more. So you
Yeah.
can place these devices very easily, and you can then integrate, add a whole load of capability into these systems. And you can use TagoIO to provide more functional information, more analysis, if you wish, right into the heart of the SCADA systems that they have. So it really is does could if you like supercharge existing systems by adding on the IoT with Tago into those systems. And we've done some major buildings in London. We've done quite a few, and basically it means you're not tearing up the building to put new wiring in
Yes.
or trying to add on all sorts of different systems in there, which are complex and expensive. This is a very simple approach, and it's a very easy approach, and it's very cost effective. So, and you can get really good quick gains out of adding IoT into building management systems.
Yeah, I love that. So supercharge, love that comment. Cost effective, they go hand in hand. Just think of that.
Yeah,
Supercharge and be cost effective. What an
yeah,
amazing concept,
absolutely.
right? That's great. That's great. Some common challenges. Again, I've been doing this about 6 years with TagoIO. UKIoT, been around since 2018, so they're not new to the game, right? And what are some common challenges we see in IoT projects and how to overcome them, right? Let's talk about that quickly, right? Proof of concept that never scales. When I meet with customers, not all the time, but sometimes when I meet with customers, they are so focused on a business problem or a concept, right? They're just honed in on this one thing, right? And yes, we talk about that and how to resolve that, but I try to turn that conversation into a scalability conversation. How are you going to adapt to ever-changing business requirements? Is a key one, right? How are you going to you need to start with KPIs and decisions. So I get the mind thinking a little more of not what you're trying to solve now, right? But to take a word from Chris, how can you supercharge that and get the most value out of it, right? That's the whole point, right?
Absolutely.
Device management can become unmanageable. I've worked with customers that didn't come to us. And by the way, reach out to your CSM, reach out to UKIoT. We can help in a lot of these areas. But device management, I see some people get in trouble with device management using tagging groups and automation, which is all available through TagoIO, and it's really the core of TagoIO, tagging, right? Really helps you manage your devices. Poor visibility into system health. Monitor infrastructure, not just use cases. What are you trying to do, right? Another cool thing about TagoIO is, I hear all the time, vendor lock-in, vendor lock-in. Well, you don't have that with TagoIO. Choose platforms such as TagoIO and architectures that stay flexible. Again, I've said that many times, but I get asked sometimes, what makes you unique? What makes TagoIO unique? And really, it's two words. It's customizable and flexibility. If I have to put it in two words, those are the two words I'm going to use because you can adapt very quickly and have a very strong use case and application. So I'm sure you've seen your challenges in the in IoT projects, Chris. That's just some of the things that I say. Start with KPIs and decision and think about scaling. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree, David. The thing is too, I think you have to go one step back a little bit, and that is the customer mismatch between uplink frequency and battery life. It's a
Hmm.
fine balance. For instance, the customer doesn't want to, as I mentioned earlier, you need to have products that are put in place and kept there, almost fit and forget for some number of years. But if you're going to need data very rapidly, then you've got to compromise on that. You've got to understand the relationship between the amount of data you're collecting and how long the device is going to be there. There is a relationship which you have, an inverse relationship which you have to follow. And of course, I think one of the other points is choose your data very carefully.
Hmm.
Um, you're up every time you uplink, you've got to send exactly the data you need. Be very, very careful because that data that you're sending, it's going to be vital in terms of analyzing what you're going to do. And also, too much data can be as bad as too little. You can swamp yourself with data.
Absolutely.
Start off small, build the system slowly. The great thing about LoRaWAN and Tago is you can start small and scale, even within a building. You can scale gradually. You learn all about it. You get a good, basic, solid understanding of what's happening, and then you can say, "Oh yeah, I can add that bit of data. I need that bit of information. That will really make a difference." And you can grow into the system rather than suddenly being faced with a massive amount of data that you can't handle. I mean, that's one of the vital points is to grow with the system. And I think and the fact that IoT, the devices themselves, are very easy to put in place gradually. You don't have to suddenly wire everything up. You can
Hmm.
say, let's start off with some temperature sensors here. Let's start off with people counting over there. Start off with that. Is that useful? Yes, it is. Let's go to the next stage. Build that system, and you really keep control of it. And we and UKIoT and Tago will hold your hand all the way through the whole process to
Absolutely.
give you confidence, so you understand what you're building and what you're doing. That's
Yeah.
one of them. That's one of the major things is giving confidence to the customer so they feel comfortable with it and can grow it and make use.
Yes, and you have the best of both worlds here because again, UKIoT and TagoIO, we've worked together on lots of different projects and we accommodate each other very well. But Chris, if I'm going to tag on to something, when you're talking about too much data, right? One thing that I find, and I just thought of this, is that customers do not think about, most customers do not think about optimization early on, right? So you really
Absolutely.
need to think about optimization. And an example of that is if I have a sensor and it's sending me, 15 variables, temperature, humidity, overzone, mid zone, all these different data, but I'm only interested in 4 or 5 of those variables or those data points, then here's where optimization comes in. Create your own connector on TagoIO, talk to UKIoT, and really so you can eliminate those other variables because you don't need that data, right? Storing data and all that can be expensive, especially if you
Yeah.
have too much of it.
Good
So
point. Good
think
point.
optimization. Talk to us about optimization. I often get with customers that have been longtime Tago users and they have a new device or a handful of new devices and they don't understand why they're getting all this data and how to optimize it, whether they use metadata or they just create their own connector. There's things that we can help you with there. We talk about that future. Our last subject here is future proofing your IoT infrastructure for scalability. Excuse me. So scalability is not just more devices, right? That's part of it, but it's really not the core of it. It's more data, users, dashboards, and integrations. You need to build for change, right? It's not going to be perfect in the beginning, and that's okay, right? But we'll get you close. I can guarantee you that, right? So, if you really think about it, decouple hardware from software platforms, basically enable swapping devices without rewriting applications, right? Adapt to your business, ever-changing business requirements very quickly, as I mentioned earlier. You know, multi-tenant, API first, automation friendly. That's all TagoIO from that aspect with the supporting cast of UKIoT, right? That's how we build this partnership. And when we're talking with customers as a team, right, they're really getting, as I said, best of both worlds. Because I'm not an expert in the hardware. UKIoT is not an expert in the widgets and the dashboards and the analytics that we could produce. They're very aware of it, but they're not the expert. Like I said earlier, I already learned some things I didn't know from Chris, and I speak to him, at least twice a week.
And likewise. Definitely
Always learning
likewise.
something from you, Chris. Always learning something from you. But future proofing your IoT infrastructure and scalability. I don't know if you have anything to add there, but feel free.
Well, yeah, one thing I would say is looking at the way that you scale. One of the things we do at UKIoT is we always pre-configure systems before they go out. In other words, you don't want to be messing around on site. What we do is if there is a project, we most likely actually pre-configure a lot of the systems and we set it up and test it so before it actually goes out to site. So what it means is you don't have to have high technical cost staff on site trying to install it. You basically have electricians physically installing where they go, but everything's all been connected and running to the gateway before it even arrives. And even going further than that, with Tago, you can actually have that data checked through into TagoIO, and you can know that the whole system is running. And basically, once you've got a template for how you want to expand and scale, you can then repeat that. So very, very reasonably. So it means scaling up needn't mean you've got to have a lot of hours of high technical cost with people on staff on site. As long as you've got good installers, electrical installers who can put products into site, then we actually provide completely pre-configured devices. And I think, I mean, we say one of the projects we've got is going across 900 restaurant sites across the UK, and that needs a template. You send that, you create the information. You can't have things going wrong somewhere along in any of those sites. So you just go out and they're pre-configured and slotted in. Yeah, so and I think the other thing too is to always to make sure that you've got full documentation. Document everything that you do when you
Absolutely.
scale. Make sure you know all that you've done. How have you set how do you want the devices set up? What are the keys? Store that information. All of the background. It's boring work, but it's important work. You've got to get that done to know that you can scale carefully and reliably into your building or to your sites.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. So with that, it's just been a pleasure for people on this call that have, attended our webinars. This one was a little different format, right? Where we just wanted to have an honest conversation with you, with because we're your partners as well. UKIoT is your partner, Togo's your partner. So we didn't want to convolute it with a bunch of slides, and we really wanted a free form conversation. Yes, we had our predefined topics, of course, of things that we really thought, and we spent a lot of time, thinking about how can we really help our audience, right? And that's what these subjects were. There's more to it. That's why what you're seeing on your screen now is reach out to UKIoT. Ask for a demo on TagoIO. Create your account on Tago. It's free. Um, you get 5 dashboards, 5 devices, but it really gives you an idea to really get started. If you're interested in UKIoT services, which I highly, highly recommend that you go to their site and see what they do, or just reach out to us directly. Right? You will be receiving an email, but if you just ask for a demo, I'm going to see that, right? Because I am the customer success manager. The other CSMs will see it. Chris has his team. So it's just been a pleasure talking with you today, Chris, and
Yeah,
really,
likewise, David.
yeah, really explaining to our customers of what we provide. So for me, it's just been a pleasure. Follow UKIoT on LinkedIn. Follow TagoIO, get the latest news. There's newsletters out there, blogs, use cases on the websites. Just go check it out, really, just so you can get more information. But Chris, as I said, it's been a pleasure talking with you today, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.